Hi there, sweetheart. Yeah, I sent off the care package to you, and I have proof, little confirmation slip so I can monitor it. You should get it in about a day or two. So, I'm listening to one of my first albums. I picked a lot of berries to get this album, and I still have it. Had it since about 1982. It's the Wilson twins, Ann and Nancy Wilson, from this area of Washington State, from the band Heart. It was really them, though. Amazing. It's one of the reasons why I had dreams and goals about moving up here someday. Amazing album. Nothing like the Dog and Butterfly and the Minstrel Winds. This blows my mind every time I listen to it. I had superstitions as a child, though, about that song, because every time it would play on the kitchen radio, it would be around a time where my dad, your grandfather John, would be endlessly ranting about this and that and talking about the past. And I used to think that there was some kind of superstition behind that. And I couldn't get it out of my mind until I actually bought the album to prove to myself in my head that it was nothing but magical thinking. But that music kept me going as a child. And, you know, I remember when you were little, you kind of liked some of my old school music, especially the techno and the old school funk and disco. To this day, you love ABBA. So do I. Incredible, incredible stuff. But we're going to talk about what I originally was going to title my memoir about the whole to-do. And one of my first memories of your grandfather when I was a baby. Actually, I had a few early memories. I don't know what that is. I remember, here's an example. I remember sometime when I was a little girl, or even a baby, because my mom would tell me when I would tell her about this memory, she's like, how can you remember that? You must have been maybe 1, 2 years old. But I remember feeling the draft and the cool air out on the front porch of the old house, and my dad being surrounded by his buddies. They were all laughing and going on, joking about the good old days. And I remember I was trying to stand up on his lap, holding on around his neck. I remember, you know, him sitting in a chair there. It was very comfortable. And he kept looking over to me. We were face to face with each other. And he was smiling. And I remember the cigar smoke. He'd be puffing on a cigar and making sure to kind of wave it away, the smoke, and keep it a distance from me. I remember feeling the heat from that cigar and the deep smell, almost like incense. I know you don't like incense. You're allergic to a lot of that stuff, and that's all right. But it's weird how you have those memories in your head. My mom would say, how can you remember that? Because he quit smoking cigars when you were around 2 years old. You know, at the oldest you must have been 2 going on 3. you know. So, kind of boggles the mind how far back we can remember things, even if they're just shadows of our memories. But I was still visiting your grandfather. And in this sense, this is kind of symbolic. Your uncles, who I regarded and couldn't define it till later on after my divorce, I regarded them as monsters. They were out of the picture. So we're going to do that. Okay? And then we have this. This is that album. We would talk periodically when I would visit. And sometimes we'd go out for long drives too. But I remember a day when I was visiting, and he loved to read his newspaper. I think it was on a Sunday, because on Sundays back then you'd always get a thick paper, and it would always have like all the ads in it and the coupons and all the major entertainment going on in the area. And then it would have what he termed, and I accidentally term it to this day, and people think I'm talking like an old lady, as the funnies. And that's what it was regarded as, the comics. You know, he called them reading the funnies. And we would share and laugh and talk about things. This particular Sunday, though, it merged into another argument. And then it also struck me as an early memory. And it regards one of his canes. When I originally wanted to write a memoir about these memories and dedicate it to you and your grandmother Sarah, who I originally named you after. It was going to be titled The Canes of Duality. I still have all the old outlines and brainstorming and ideas. And I remember, I presented it actually to Francis, and he's doing okay. Him and I, we needed to separate and be friends. I need to work on myself, and I need to work on my art. And if he's out there, hi Francis, I still care about you. But things have to be the way they are. And I hope you're doing all right. I'll give you a call in a few days. But Francis was listening to me because I had all these ideas and I was just writing things down. It was just all of a sudden coming out of me. And he's like, you got something. This makes some sense. Because he saw it as conflict too between two layers of class society. I'll talk about the first cane here. This old house. Beautiful, old antiques, but nothing special. A lot of things had to be replaced. And your grandfather, he was such a skinflint. He hated it when things would be moved around or changed. He wanted things to be positioned in their original state, unless maybe he wanted to change it for whatever reason. And usually it was to accommodate, his disability. But he wanted even the pictures. My goodness, it was almost like being in an old-timey shrine or something out of you like the Brontes and all that Gothic stuff. It was something like the environment out of an old Victorian novel. all the portraits of the bleeding heart of Jesus, where he's pointing at the heart and he's got, all that kind of position. And then looking up, real sad. And all the old wood and old lace and lamps and things like that. And then the knickknacks in the china cabinet and cupboards everywhere, down low or up high, built right into the walls, old intricate wood. A lot of that stuff was considered sacred, and I barely ever touched it. But once in a while, he would say, go look in the cabinet, or he would show me things. I remember one thing, though, that used to hang on his chair by his bed near a huge cedar chest. It was a broken cane. I thought about drawing a photo of it. Actually, of two canes in particular. The second cane did not belong to him. But maybe in the future I can give you another artistic example of it, and then go deeper on the meaning, at least in my mind, of what it represented, and also how it affected one of my earliest memories. But instead of a photo or a painting or a picture, we're going to use something else here. I have an old wooden dowel. Sometimes I use this for my gardening. I don't know. I got it years ago at a hardware store. I always thought it would have a use. I kind of wish I had the cane that I had as I was healing from my surgery when my left leg had the paralysis. But I gave my cane away to a friend who needed it, an older woman. I couldn't see holding on to it because I knew that I was healing and I was going to walk again. And yeah, at first it was kind of dicey, kind of touch and go. I wasn't sure. But I worked every day to make my leg alive again, to make those pins and needles go away. But there was a broken cane. It was beige colored, hanging over an old wooden chair made of maple by your grandfather's bed. It was near his shoes, and he had what looked like an old wooden toolbox with a handle on it. It had all his shoe shining tools and things, rags, stuff like that, and the old shoe shine he would use for his shoes. He was very particular about his shoes. He was very particular about his canes. The canes that he preferred to use were made, and they still sell them today, out of rosewood, which is a darker, and I thought it was more elegant looking wood. But he would always explain how that wood was more secure and more strong. And he was always particular about the stoppers that would go on the bottom of the cane, because as soon as the handle part that you grab onto would wear off and wear down, and he felt like he needed to get a new pair, he'd have to stock up on stoppers. And we would actually go to the shop, as kids, whoever had the free time to go with him. And he would actually have us demonstrate for him so he could observe to make sure that the stoppers would not slip. We'd walk with the canes and show him up and down in front of the salesman. It was a big to-do, a big ordeal. It would take a while. And we couldn't leave until he was for sure about it and until he could try it out for himself. And then we'd always end up going out to eat or something on the way home. But there was a particular cane that was beige, and it was broken through the middle. Okay, so imagine a curved beige cane hanging over a chair. As a child, I would ask him questions about it. And he would say, "Well, don't you remember? You were with me when I fell, when that cane broke." Now looking back, yeah, I had memories. I had memories at that time talking to him too. I must have been around 6 or 7 years old when we first talked about it, and then later on I would keep asking him. Well, that particular day of visiting him, I took that cane off of the chair and brought it into the living room. I didn't want to argue with him about it, but I wanted to get to the bottom of it. Well, apparently, when I was a baby, about maybe 1 or 2 years old, we were visiting the family of Gina, my guardian. And this time he explained it in detail with me about what went down. We were visiting. His best friend, Gina's father, had a Christmas tree farm there. It's still there to this day, and his oldest son apparently runs it. When I visited that area, of Humbleton and Calapooya Park there, we went on the outskirts of the park, Francis and I, and it actually has the old family name of his best friend still there. And it just brought back memories. And I think that's probably the beginnings of me jotting down things for a memoir for you. But every year, your grandfather would arrange it to make sure that we got a Christmas tree from his best friend. And it was a big to-do. It was not only picking out the tree, which I really didn't have any participation in. I was the baby. But maybe your uncles or mom would participate in this. And then we would arrange on how to get it home. Usually it would be his best friend putting it in his truck. But we'd go over for a dinner. And all day, sometimes into the night affair. But I remember my father holding me, and he had a hand on one cane. Okay, I don't remember him having a hand on the cane. This time he explained it to me here. And as he's leaving, either it's his friend handing me over to him, and they're laughing and joking, or vice versa. The way he explained it, they were both taking turns holding me and laughing as we're leaving. And it was very, very cold that night too. We're looking at about, December, getting close to Christmas time. And as he's leaving out the door, he's handing me over back to his friend, and the cane snapped. It injured your grandfather's leg really bad. It wasn't broken, but it hit his mind and it scared him, and he did have to go to the hospital. And I remember that moment as a state of fear, and I do remember seeing some flashing lights and a lot of commotion. So, that was the end of getting canes made of the cheaper grade of wood. And it affected his mind. It affected his self-esteem, made him paranoid about falling down and hurting himself again. It just, in my mind, and during the argument, I pointed out, you should have seen a counselor. You should have seen somebody even besides a priest. And then every time we've been around the father that would visit us, or when we would go to church, sometimes I would go with my dad to church, but because I went to parochial school, I went to church, at least 2 times a week, and then did other things there around the church relating to school. I got tired of it real quick. I didn't like it. But he should have talked to somebody. And it led, I think, to a lot of his fears of failure and how he didn't see himself on the same level as his other relatives and friends who were active farmers, who could move around and do things and see it as having a normal life. Your grandfather couldn't accept that he had what I saw as a decent job working for the state as a draftsman. And he was amazing at drawing maps and whatnot. Once in a while, I'd have the opportunity to visit him at that job and to get to know the surveyor photographers and the engineers that worked with him. And even though he was older than a lot of them, and he'd tease a lot of them too, calling them hippies, they all worked well together. And they really respected him because he knew all the old-timey roads. He knew how to communicate well with people. When farmers or families and what have you, when they would come in to correspond, to want to know what's going to be done about a certain road or this or that, oftentimes the boss, the man in charge, would introduce Dad to them because he had a way of talking and talking about good memories and whatnot, making them feel at ease. And that was something to be proud of. And soon the argument calmed down, and it was another moment of crying and hugging because, taking that broken cane down kind of broke one of his phobias, one of his taboos. I want to talk about another cane. Your mom's father, Edward, my buddy when I was little, and my dad's rival. In his bedroom, by his dresser, was a simple cane. Well, it really wasn't simple. It was intricately carved. It was once a simple stick like this, maybe a little bit thicker, and heavier form of wood, but it was carved down into all kinds of intricate designs, eagles, certain kind of writings and what have you, a lot of stuff in German. Amazing. And it had a hole at the tip of it, whittled through, all the way through, with a piece of leather strung through and then tied. Is a walking stick. Absolutely beautiful. when I would visit him and stay with him. And by the way, I felt comfortable around both my dad and my grandfather. But with my grandfather, it was extra special because he valued my drawings. He valued the fact that I was different from my siblings. He saw it as no big deal. He saw, that I had a little something, something, and we had a little bit in common, I think. Grandma used to always emphasize on that him and I were two peas in a pod. But that came. He would let me play with it, and he would let me dance with it. And there were times when he'd have his music on, the old big band stuff, or the variety show like the Lawrence Welk show playing with the old waltzes and what have you, and polka music. And as a child, he actually taught me the four-step, the foundation of dancing a waltz. But he would let me play with that cane. And I remember, as a child, I must have been about 6 years old, sitting next to him. I grabbed the cane and I sat next to him on his bed. I think he was engaged in watching, some golf on TV at the time. But he felt that what I was talking about was quite interesting, and usually he was engaged when he would watch his sports, but he turned the TV down and turned around and actually, listened to what I had to say. And I asked him about the cane. Where did it come from? Did you make it? How did it come to be? And he explained that when he was in the military as a staff sergeant, and in the prison area where he was working, there were German soldiers. Some were Nazi soldiers, I suppose, and others were regular army prisoners from the regular German army. Because of the fact that he was bilingual, he could communicate with these men. And he had a special kind of, I don't know how to describe it, a form of empathy for them. But one prisoner in particular, he got to know really well. Their families could, he could relate with his family background and where this prisoner grew up as a child. And there was a term of endearment there. And there was a time when that prisoner was really afraid. And grandfather had a way of putting this man at ease, to give him a little bit of kindness and respect. But, still being a staff sergeant, still doing what he had to do, but treating those prisoners like men. He saw it as a terrible thing, that war. But a lot of these men who got involved, they got swept into that system and that society, thinking that they were doing the right thing. People make mistakes. But that prisoner in particular carved him that walking stick. While he was sitting there every day, he'd be whittling on it. And he gave it to Grandfather Edward as a gift. Now that walking stick, to this day, your cousin, Sophia's brother, has it over at his place. And I'm glad he ended up with it. He's the one who should have gotten it because of what it means to us as a family, what it stands for. But seeing that both of those men, and those men apparently used to fight over me when I was a baby, and then they would argue. It was mainly my dad and his big ranting mouth. And then my grandfather, the father-in-law, telling him to stifle himself, because he'd have none of it, you know. It was that kind of fighting. But I remember my mom telling me that they would have the silliest arguments. They argued about me when I was a newborn baby, too. You know, what name I should have, and where my looks come from, because I'm the one in the family with the dark points. Whose side does that belong to? Really, it comes from both. Just silly things men argue about. But I think, going back to your grandfather, John, and looking at these two incidences as the canes of duality, dueling canes, what they symbolize. He had a lot of jealousy, and he had a lot of regret. And rather than looking at the bright side of things, or the things to be thankful for, and all his accomplishments, it really ground away into his heart. Speaking of sacred hearts and the bleeding hearts of Jesus, it really hurt his heart. He couldn't put the past behind. There was something grinding into him that made him to repeat the past. Either it was hot or it was cold, black or white. But in the next video, I'm going to tell you how I further cracked into that crab, kept all of this a secret, and I found the shades of gray within. Somebody's texting me. But, you know, and it gave me my quest before I go on how I wanted to learn further about how things work and about history, because I've always been a history buff. It started when I was a little girl, and I still have books on this stuff because I find the tales fascinating. So it starts with, you know, this is a book about the Dictionary of the Saints, and it's only the saints within Catholicism. You know, there's more saints out there having to do with different Orthodox faiths, and then also martyrs behind the Reformation and the Protestant faiths that emerged. And then it merged into, in the 90s when you were little, about, you know, this is an encyclopedia of the different gods. I was trying to figure out why my family was so screwed up and which way to go. But then, as I started working on myself and coming to terms with myself, and it helped my self-esteem so much, about the history of the working class struggle, okay? And how the systems, the society we live in, affects especially the working class, but humanity as a whole. And, you know, how it's going to evolve from there, or at least the hopes of how it may evolve from there. But anyways, I've been using up the makeup that you sent me last year. I love it. I'm almost done with actually 2 shades. I love the shades of pinks. But I'm going to wind this up. And I hope this story helped you. You know, so in the future, if you ever see me and Cousin Sophia talk about things, you know, because she has her ideas too, I'm sure. But you'll know where I'm coming from. And like I said before, it's good to see, you know, how you might react to it. And I love the fact that you can see my face here, to see me communicate with you here, coming straight from the heart. But always remember, I love you, and I'm so glad you started your new job. Drink lots of water. Stay hydrated, especially I know the seasons are getting cold over there. It's changing. The seasons are changing over there. And take really good care of your knee. Take really good care of your feet. Those are your money makers. And don't forget to ring the bell. And I love you so much. Take care. Goodbye.